Hey everyone, I'm excited to be here with Mr. Jack Blanch. Welcome, Jack.
Thank you very much, Father.
And today we're going to be talking about Pope Leo's first encyclical, Magnifica, Humanitas. So we've both read it briefly, we've skimmed through it, but we always like to have opinions even about things that we may not know very deeply.
Well, speak for yourself on that one, Father.
Well, I might be proven wrong. Time will tell. So Pope Leo, first encyclical, everyone's been waiting for a while, over a year into his pontificate now. What were your general impressions with reading the encyclical?
It's always like such a important thing, the first encyclical, because it's such an insight into the mind of the new Pope. So obviously with John Paul II, it's like Redemptor Hominis, is that right?
Exactly.
Benedict, it's Das Caritas Est, and Francis, I think technically the first one that he wrote was Laudato Si, so it's like you kind of get a bit of an idea of the program of the Pope. So that's something that I'm interested in as a sort of like church watcher, I guess, is you sort of like get to see behind the curtain a little bit. And Leo is still a bit of a cipher. It's sort of hard to know exactly, like the sort of like, is he a conservative or a progressive? None of these people fit easily into these categories, but what are his preoccupations and what are the things that he's interested in? What are the things that he's going to be returning to over the next, however long he's the Pope, which is presumably a while. First impressions are just very interested, I guess. Just like this is a very interesting look behind the veil. So,
your interest was piqued after reading it?
Yeah, definitely. I guess I'm a bit of a can we swear in this podcast? I was going to say I'm a wanker,
yes.
Father.
Sorry?
Yeah.
A bit clearer.
I like style. I'm interested in the way that people write as well.
Well, you started with creative writing, didn't you?
I did, yeah. So Benedict was a German and he had a very sort of German way of writing. John Paul II, very Polish, very continental, trained in his philosophy. So he's a bit kind of long-winded, kind of
broad.
Yeah.
Large, yes.
Francis, I don't know the South American mind particularly well, so I don't know what was going on there. But I think with Pope Leo, you can see that he kind of has it seems to me that he's an Anglo and he's writing in a kind of Anglo academic way. It made sense to me the way that he was writing it. I understood it all. It was all very clear. It wasn't very beautiful, I wouldn't say, but it's an easy read, unlike maybe some other, I wouldn't recommend a Pope Benedict encyclical to somebody who's just sort of stumbling across Catholicism, for example. It would be a bit dense, but I think you could give this to really anyone and they could read it. That's interesting. What about yourself, Father? What were your first impressions?
I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. I appreciate that first impressions were the first paragraph. I just appreciated he quoted Gaudium et Spes 22. I'm like, that's John Paul II.
Sure, that ticks every box for you.
It did. It was his most often quoted quote from only in the mystery of the incarnate word does the mystery of man take on light. So I thought Christocentric accent, let's start there. And the importance of the face of Christ to interpret all of reality, particularly the human person within the context of AI was really, I thought, he ticked the right boxes. Maybe a little too long.
Sure.
80 pages. Although I like the summary of the Catholic social teaching aspect, although that too was kind of
long.
So
I guess it's a long tradition now. So,
yes. How I long for those days when letters were the length of letters, not books. Right. But yeah, good. And even the context I appreciated of picking up the theme from Leo XIII of Catholic social teaching. I think that was the focus of him picking the Leo XIV.
Yes, for sure.
And which I also wanted to touch upon the relationship between the two and the context, particularly if you can comment on Leo XIII's context and Leo XIV's.
Yeah, so for those who maybe aren't aware, so Leo XIII was a pope. He's the last pope of the 19th century. And so he's sort of straddling an interesting and important time in recent history, I guess. And he's also the sort of first pope elected after the First Vatican Council. So he sort of comes into the papacy, I'd say, with, the theological winds at his back, even though the church has lost the papal states. The Pope has been given this kind of like enormous shotgun of power by an ecumenical council. Now he's infallible and he can say whatever he wants. And then it's like, what does he say? Well, actually, the things that he mainly focuses on I think he writes like 20 encyclicals on the Rosary, so there's that. He writes like some important things on rediscovering St. Thomas Aquinas' philosophy, and then but really his main legacy is this document he wrote called Rerum Novarum, on the new things, where he talks about the conflict at the end of the 19th century between capital and labor. So this is, with the coming of industrialization, you have, the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer. You have people moving from rural agricultural backgrounds to work in factories, and being, not having a particularly good time economically with that. And so there's this sort of growing across society at large. There's this rift. And so he writes Rerum Novarum, and he's specifically addressing this problem of industrialization, of the conflict between capital and labor, which of course is at the time like very important, because you have, communism hasn't come in yet, but it's about to, and it's on the horizon, and socialism is a sort of like broadly discussed topic. And so he describes, both his criticisms of socialism, but then also his criticisms of capitalism. And this kind of sets the scene really for, European politics, at least until today. You still have Christian democratic, sort of socialist democratic parties in power in Europe, and they take their principles from this document, Rerum Novarum, where he sort of says, things like private property is of course a good, it's not an absolute good. We have to like use what we have to help other people. Yep. He articulates a few principles of what the church calls Catholic social teaching now, which maybe you would like to talk about, Father, so I'm not the only one talking.
Go for it.
Well, so yeah, he starts, this is like the first document in what becomes a series of documents over the, last 130 years, where various popes have talked about, various social issues of their day. And in doing this, they kind of articulate a set of principles, which we now call Catholic social teaching. And Pope Leo reiterates this at the start of his encyclical, and he goes through the history of it and what these principles are. And essentially, I think Pope Leo talks about 4 from memory, because I didn't read it that closely, like you said. He talks about the common good, this idea of the common good, that you can't actually just pursue individual goods in society alone, right? And not have anything to do with anyone else. This just won't work. I think he quotes somebody saying, nobody saves themselves by themselves, right? Yes. As Christians, we believe we're saved by Christ, and we're saved by the community who baptizes us and helps us into the faith and all that sort of stuff. So we have this idea of the common good, the goods that we can't attain only by ourselves. So goods like family, right? Like I can't have the good of family as an isolated, atomized individual. Subsidiarity, which is the principle that and it's a bit complicated, higher order authorities shouldn't take over from lower order authorities. Yes. Now, what does that mean? Essentially, it just means, the federal government shouldn't be taking out your bins, like there is a kind of like competence natural to lower authorities. So like, for example, the authority of the family over itself to raise their children as they wish, to value the things they want to establish their own routines and rhythms and patterns of life. And of course, that's not to say that there isn't such a thing as genuine, like high authority, like a federal government or a king or something like that.
But it's always for the sake of the lower ones.
Exactly. Yeah. And those lower ones need to be respected, because of course the power imbalance means that often it's abused. Yes. And so of course, like why is Leo XIII talking about that in the 19th century? Because there's lots of that going on at the time. And obviously Leo XIV is returning to this idea because it's clearly prevalent in the way that AI and information technology more generally kind of wildly is distributed, like, towards one end of the social spectrum, right? Like we consume the content, people create the content, and these people have the real power. So that's, common good, subsidiarity, solidarity, which is should be a familiar term to most people, because it's sort of been taken up by the labor movement and all that sort of stuff. Like, being in solidarity with somebody means like choosing to suffer with them through their suffering, basically. So he addresses that. And then the 4th point, human dignity. Yeah, the importance of human dignity.
Yeah, he articulates kind of peculiarly a 5th of social justice, which is closely linked with solidarity. I think he kind of puts that together, which I think in an age of AI is actually quite important, because it is there is an ambiguity about who's responsible for what,
Yes.
particularly with the invisibility of it.
Yeah.
So I think it was a good point to make.
And I think he brings up that a lot through the encyclical of like the idea of responsibility and accountability.
Yes.
As social
Well,
justice
I
and
like that point you just made
Yeah.
about, we consume the content, but the creators are the ones that have the power.
Yeah.
The question is, who are they? It's pretty ambiguous.
Yeah.
Hard to latch onto them. Yeah. So now that's really helpful. So Leo XIII articulated these principles within the context of the Industrial Revolution. With the ideological background of communism and, capitalism. Leo XIV, the context is AI. You could AI revolution. What is the ideological substructure of that?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you raised that part. Yeah, because I do think that you could say with Rerum Novarum, although Pope Leo is critiquing, on the face of it, it seems he's critiquing the sort of like social move, the outcomes of the social movement. He's actually critiquing the thing behind that, the thing behind industrialization, the problems that it's presenting, which is communism, capitalism. And I think with Leo XIV, I think you see in chapter 3 of this document that he's kind of identifying the ideologies that are really problematic, I guess, behind what's, all this technology stuff, which he identifies as the kind of transhumanist ideology, this idea that we can fix ourselves or improve ourselves with technology, and AI being a sort of facet of this, and this is something to be very concerned about, but also this idea of, a very small number of people creating the sort of frame of AI with their own kind of prejudices and desires baked into it. And we actually need the idea of the objectivity of it, which we need to be very suspicious of, right? Like it's not objective because it's been created by people, and these people have created it with their own parameters, their own beliefs baked into it. I think that that's kind of like the third chapter is really where he's putting his,
because he kind of articulates like transhumanism and post-humanism, and yet it's not completely untrue. All evil is parasitic on some kind of good, because we are called to be more than human. We're divinization, deification. So there is transhumanism baked into the Christian culture.
I wouldn't say that, but I guess one could say that. Yeah.
So where does it go? Like, we're made in the image and likeness of God, and in Christ we're called to become like gods. So where does transhumanism, posthumanism get it wrong then?
Yeah, well, I think it's because we're not trying to do it with God, and that's what he's essentially saying, is that it's this sort of self-driven project of improvement, which, but essentially it's like, you've got to move your mind to the data sphere or something like that, and that will actually, I think what he says, I can't remember it specifically, but he's sort of saying, well, actually, there's something really good about being human, right? Like it's in our frailties, in our weaknesses.
Yes.
God enters into those, and these are not things to be escaped at all costs, right? Like these are actually the sources of our sanctification.
Yes,
right?
yeah. That was a beautiful passage on limitations. And it reminded me of a quote from John Paul II in one of his poems, that limitations is a window into the depths. And I think that's, it's quite beautiful that, limitation is what makes something real.
Yeah.
The problem with, I think, a lot of this AI transhumanism is the lack of definition and the loss of identity.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the other thing to say would be that, of course, we think that we're called to go beyond our limitations, right, in virtue.
Which means that there is a limit, though, that you transgress. Transcendence requires a limit that you go beyond.
Yes, but that's not what, the idea of sort of the post-humanist idea is trying to do, right? Like it's trying to do something quite different, which is make humanity something that it's not, right? Rather than kind of make humanity the truer version of itself that I would say, is what Christianity is asking us to do, right?
And I think he really hits upon it, and I mentioned it earlier with the Christocentric accent, but the problem with it is its atheistic tendency, a lack of, without God, pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps, trying to redeem ourselves, which becomes problematic. So it's idolatrous versus iconic. Idol versus icon. So I mean, I suppose we're supposed to be transparent to divine, not opaque. Become, like the psalmist says, with mouths but they cannot speak, eyes but they cannot see, nostrils but cannot smell. So no, that's really helpful. Thanks for that. Were there any favourite passages for yourself?
Well, of course, it's very nice to see the Magisterium quote Tolkien. That's, just like as a fanboy, that's got to get a big tick. Yeah. But no, look, that's that central part. That third chapter was, I think, really just banger after banger. That he really does hit the nail on the head. I think he really, and he's not he's not a sort of Luddite going out there saying we need to smash up the AI or anything like that. But he does adequately, I think, critique. It's not just a tool that has kind of no meaning, and it's doesn't, it's all about our intentions. It does shape us, and we have to be careful about the things that shape us. That doesn't mean there can't be applications for it, but we have to sort of bring to light and bring to the sort of public sphere this, all the things that go into sort of the ethical makeup of AI, and this needs to be discussed openly and broadly, and not very opaquely as it is now. So
yeah, and that's one thing I really appreciated myself, with the non-neutrality of technology. And it reminded me a lot of these kind of 20th century cultural critics in Neil Postman and Marshall McLuhan, that it's not just a tool that we impose our intention upon. It's not just a tool that it depends on how you use it as to what it implies. There's a sacramentality, a signification in the object itself that symbolizes something, and that. Because one of the things, and it reminded me of the Catechism with the three elements of a moral act. You've got the object, intention, and circumstance. And thinking that a tool is just neutral and dependent on how you use it, that takes out the other two. I mean, it takes into account the intention, but what about the circumstance and the object itself? Sure. And so I liked how he framed it as a horizon more than just a tool. Marshall McLuhan's "The medium is the message." And even I recently was reading Michael Hamby, and he said the very question of thinking that it's neutral betrays a technological mindset, that nature is devoid of any implication in itself, that we impose our will on the world, which is, again, an idolatrous thing, that there is no receptivity to the way the things are. Everything is subject to the use that I give it. And yet there's no meaning behind it, which I really appreciated, because it's not often pointed towards the idea of it already implies something outside of my will.
At the very least, and he quite, I think, correctly sort of says, well, somebody else's will is at play.
That's
right?
Yes.
You're deluding yourself.
It's either God's or someone else's. So
it is very good. So I think there was obviously lots of anticipation in the sort of Catholic sphere around this encyclical. Was the Pope going to go sort of full Gregory XVI condemning the use of railroads on this, electric lights and
That's it. That was the other one,
or was it going to be a bit more accommodating to the world? Would the Pope sort of go too far? Of course, he invited the sort of CEO of Anthropic to come along.
Yes.
And I don't think I was speaking to a good friend of ours actually, who's in the world of AI, and he's a Catholic, and he's been involved in sort of various conferences and stuff over the last few years. I don't think even he sort of wasn't very impressed with what the CEO had to say or anything. But I think in the document, he does make clear why he was there, because he also discusses how at certain points in history, I guess the papacy has addressed itself and these social questions to states pretty directly, right? Governments are the ones that have to do this because it's government intervention that will fix the economy or not. And he does mention in this document, well, actually, that's not necessarily the case anymore. Now we have these kind of transnational corporations that, especially in the realm of AI and information more generally, they shape even how states react or how they act. So really, he's doing this kind of very clever American piece of PR by having who cares what the guy said, right? The fact that he came to the Vatican to be there for the signing of the document and stuff like that, I think says a lot about where Leo is looking in terms of where the church can have an influence. And it's obviously very encouraging that somebody like that came and, seemed to want to be there and seemed to want to hear what the Pope had to say. And even if that's kind of imperfectly received, I guess it's better than nothing, Yeah.
Yes. Well, it's interesting. I was speaking to someone that knows him and I said, what's your take? He says, he's a mathematician.
Yeah,
Not that he's calculating, framed, but he's logical. He's
calculated.
That's it. And he's got the canonical background and he's measured, I think.
Yeah, sure.
And I think he can, he doesn't play on emotions. He works things out slowly and steadily, I think, which is, I think, quite welcome, really.
Yes, I think so too.
Yeah, he's not playing to the crowds.
Yeah.
One of the things that really I enjoyed about it was paragraph 100 on the personal use of AI, which I wanted to talk to you about. And there were 3 kind of cautions that he makes with the use of AI. The first was the immediacy with which information can be garnered. The second was, and you hinted at it earlier, the kind of feigned objectivity. And then the third was the simulation of communication. So, which I think are perennial problems for every individual that,
of course,
has a smartphone, or not. So maybe we could just walk through those. So the first one he says is the immediacy with which information can be gathered.
Well, I think he contrasts that specifically with knowing the truth, right? There's later on he articulates this in greater details. There's a whole chapter on the truth. And this idea of just getting sugar hits of information is not the same as knowing the truth of things. And there are parts later on where he talks about misinformation and the importance of education and what the state and the family and third parties can do in terms of mediating all this and stuff like that. And I think that's all really important because we all know that it's hard to find the truth of things on the internet, right? You see a news article and you sort of think that can't be right. And maybe sometimes you dig into it, you go, oh my goodness, it is like that. Who would have thought? And other times you go, oh, that's obviously disprovable, this kind of clickbaity attitude that we seem to be confronted with constantly now. I think it's a very good point, and especially with AI. And I certainly know personally, it tends to be with, I'm not trying to be discriminatory here, but older people who trust AI so implicitly, right? That they sort of jump on ChatGPT or something and they ask it a question, it gives them the answer, and they go, well, that's the answer. And it's just it's making it up. It's so often wrong. It's so often putting things together from disparate sources. So it's such a good point that he's making, that there's you have to have a love for truth before you can kind of use these technologies in any helpful or fruitful way, I think. And you certainly can't learn to love truth through using them, I think. Well, except, in its absence, I guess. So,
And I think, it reminded me, I think Postman says it, he describes it as info glut.
Yes.
We're overcome with too much information.
For sure.
And I think that becomes a problem. You need a hierarchy of value to determine what's important and what is actually relevant and what is ultimately true.
Yeah.
And that's the ethical question that I think he wants to frame it with.
Yes.
Because it is overwhelming. You don't know what to trust. There's a breakdown authority.
Yeah.
I was reminded of, Thomas's comment, or Jesus' comment to Thomas in the gospel, blessed are those who have not seen and yet still believe. Today you could say blessed are those who have seen and yet still believe.
Yeah, that's true,
Which is, we can't believe anything these days. And so it is, and then I appreciate he points towards the face of Christ as a determining factor.
Yeah.
So, he talks about that kind of hinted at the feigned objectivity. You can't trust it. And it was like Eliot's point about, where's the wisdom that we've lost the knowledge, where's the knowledge we've lost information.
Yeah.
And we're on that level of information, but there's no measure of wisdom to navigate through the world. Information is not enough to know how to live life.
Live well.
Well. But the first comment about immediacy I really found quite helpful, that it leads also to impatience, and yet, the most beautiful things in life require patience.
Yes.
I'm always reminded of that perhaps too often, but passage from Paul's letter to Corinthians, often at weddings, Corinthians 13. The first descriptor is patience. Love is patient.
Yeah.
And yet it creates a horizon, that kind of the non-neutrality of AI towards immediacy and therefore impatience. And yet the beauty, the Magnifica Humanitas requires patience.
Yes. Well, I think that's a bit of a theme going throughout it, and he deals with it in other areas as well, because he talks about the importance of the dignity of work as well. And he's talking about how like AI, obviously it's going to have huge effects on the way that we manage the economy and whether or not we should let it and how we should let it if it's going to. And one of the things he says, well, something that has to be primary here is the dignity of work, and that things purchased through work are actually very important, right? And of course, I mean, my wife she's a classical architect. She's sort of very passionate about handcrafts and these sorts of things. And so for her, it's like, well, things that take a long time take love and take patience and all sort of stuff. And you can see the beauty of them, manifested when something like that is done. Even if you don't like the style or the taste of the thing that's been produced through that process, you can't look at it and go, well, this isn't a work of love. And so that with the just absolute, immediacy of information that you can get from, AI, smartphone, general use of technology, it's sort of like, well, how have you purchased this knowledge, right? Like, and is it worth anything?
Yes, I think the question of value and worth comes into it, because it didn't cost me anything.
Yes, and I think you hosted a talk recently, Father. I think you had Father Jerome on your podcast as well recently. Yeah. And I caught a bit of the talk that he did, and he was talking about, as a lecturer, seeing students who use AI to do their work for them, basically. And this is very frustrating. And of course, the thing that's going to get lost there is because they're looking at, well, I just want to get a good mark for my assignment.
Yes.
But it's like, well, the purpose of the assignment wasn't for you to get a good mark. The purpose of the assignment was for you to learn something. And the mark is depending on how well it looks like you've learned it.
Yes.
So, and I think even in this document, Leo talks about this as well, of like how this is going to affect education, and how, when should children be introduced to these sorts of like cost-cutting and short-cutting techniques? Because, well, what are we trying to do by educating children? Are we trying to just give them information, or are we trying to give them something else? Are we trying to give them like the tools they need to work through the world, to learn true from false, to learn good from evil? And that's not as simple as just sort of saying, ask ChatGPT.
Yes, yeah. No, I mean, it kind of goes back to that ethical problem of the end justifies the mean. It doesn't matter how I get there.
Exactly.
As long as I get there. It's like, well, then, and what kind of effect would you kind of predict that would have on the person themselves? I mean, they become less human, generally speaking, but what kind of people do you predict, say, in 50 years, if they're just been born and bred on AI and ChatGPT?
Well, I think,
large language models.
John Paul II talked about this when he, with the economy, where he sort of said, like, man should be the measure of the economy, not money, right?
Yes.
Like, when we put the dollar at the center of the economy, then, we become slaves to it, and we are dehumanized in this process. And I think Leo's saying something quite similar here, right? Like, if we're putting this idea of like the immediacy and the importance of the speed of information that we can get at the center of our sort of like, I mean, he describes it, and I hate the term, as an ecology, right? As the ecology of information. It's like, oh, it's so cringe. But all right, he used it. Yeah,
I love it.
Each to their own. But like, man should be at the center of this as well, right? Like, and the flow of information and the flow of data and the truth of all this, it's there to serve us and not us it. And again, like, you see that with the way that people consume all types of things, like Instagram reels or whatever. How is this helping you? How is this serving you? Or are you serving it? So I mean, what sort of people? I mean, I think you can look around and see what sort of people that are producers, because it's already being produced. And I think it is part of the problem that is decried on the sort of like left and right of politics across the world now, where it's like, oh, everybody's like quite dumb. Everybody doesn't really know how to judge the truth from falsehood,
and boring.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it seems to break down creativity, and therefore there's an optimization that kind of reduces people to one dimension.
Well, yeah, well, this is something that we haven't talked about, is the sort of image that Pope Leo goes with at the start and then returns to throughout. Which is the Tower of Babel versus the walls of Jerusalem.
Yes.
Are we going? The Tower of Babel is the story in the Bible where people try and build a tower to the sky, basically, to the heavens.
But a name for themselves.
Yes.
And monopolizing one language.
Yes, and so they use one language to do it. So they impose a language on everybody, and eventually the tower falls, and there is a Babel of tongues afterwards, right? And of course, Pentecost being the inversion of this.
And that's that kind of going back to, it's either top down or bottom up. If it's like, it's either theistic or atheistic. If it's atheistic, you receive it as a gift from above, within which you work. From below, it's kind of a creatio ex nihilo. We're doing it ourselves.
Yes, and the difference there between a homogenized culture and a genuinely diverse one, which is like actually filled with the gifts of the individuals that are a part of it. And yeah, so I mean, I think it's a great image that he starts there, and he contrasts that with the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem in Nehemiah. I think it is.
Yes. When they come back from the Babylonian exile.
From the exile. Yeah, and it's like the walls are there to like protect them against the world.
And that goes back to that limitation, question of limits and definition.
Yeah. So I think it's a great image. I think slightly laboured in the encyclical.
The walls were as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
a lot of labourers.
But that idea of like, the homogeneity versus diversity. And of course, there's the kind of like cringe, diversity is our strength thing or whatever. But it's like that's not, I don't think, what he's saying here. I mean, he's talking about the diversity of Pentecost. He's talking about the true diversity of people who are willing to embrace the truth for their own lives, the truth for God's call for their lives, all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. And the third kind of, talks about objectivity, and the third is about simulation of communication. Could you comment upon?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more or less, in theme there. And I think he does speak kind of like well of the fact that like technology over the last couple of decades has meant that we have a much more immediate sense. And I think when he's talking about solidarity, he mentions this as well, that actually like technology has allowed us to have solidarity with people all across the world that we otherwise wouldn't have had any idea about. We wouldn't have known what their particular struggles were, but we are able now to sort of like participate in their suffering.
Which kind of links to that overcoming of government by multinational corporations. Is kind of, I suppose, the dark side of it, would you say?
Well, then he says the sort of inverse of that is that you can feel powerless, right? Like even though you might know actually about whole lot more suffering than you otherwise would have, you're so overwhelmed and you feel so
the infoglut again,
that you can't do anything about it. And that's the opposite of solidarity, like that's the opposite of doing anything about it. So this idea of like the falsification of communication, I think is, I mean, I don't actually remember that part. I mean, maybe I've got that wrong, but like, I mean, I think that's more or less where he's going with this.
I think so, yeah. And because also just basically so much communication is lost without the corporeality.
Yes.
With a physical presence. And that's, I mean...
As somebody who sits in a lot of Teams meetings, Father, I couldn't agree more.
Well, you might prefer for them not to read what you actually think.
Yeah, that's right.
Your despair and exhaustion and frustration.
Yeah, that's more or less it, yeah.
Jack seems like he's comfortable. He seems in a good mood.
He's got his camera off.
That's it. But because what was I going to say? Something about communication. Oh, like the remedy, because he kind of finishes with the two elements of a way forward in the Eucharist and Mary, which, I mean, it's basically back to the incarnation. And that's another theme from John Paul II that I really appreciated, the Christocentric, the face, the body, the corporeality that AI cannot divest people of.
Yes, yeah.
As much as it tries.
Yeah.
We can become slaves to it, like we've been mentioning. And I was reminded of Lewis's comment, humanity's power over nature is some people's power over other people's over other people.
Yes.
Which seemed like I
think he even quotes that in there. Yeah. Well, I kind of
like when I was reading, I'm like, oh, that's It was certainly underneath in themes, and I think going back to that question of what's humanity become is if you don't know what you're buying, you are the product.
Yeah. That's good.
Which, so we're becoming data points. We're becoming reduced to a means to an end, another follower or another person that, is just something I can use.
Yeah. And I think that is really important. I mean, I think it's, it seems maybe trite or it seems maybe obvious and so therefore not interesting that, I mean, the answer to all these things is kind of like human community is like looking your neighbor in the face, is having real relationships with people. And of course, the church's response to that is, of course, like sacramentality and the saints, you know, like remember that you're a dust and unto dust you shall return. But I mean, like that's obviously all that can be said, right?
Yes,
if you're willing to cede the ground that you are a sort of like soul trapped in a body, then, well, there's nothing else to say, you know? And you want to be freed in the transhumanist AI data sphere in the future. Okay, like, see ya. Like, I'm going to be enjoying a curry in the meantime, making love to my wife.
Yeah, exactly. And because kind of, this might be a little long-winded, but I think it just kind of struck me in the separation between the atomic self and the humanist kind of sphere. Going back to, I mean, I think Nietzsche really prophesied this with the death of God. He kind of prophesied that there'll be no like nihilism and totalitarianism were the two things. He says, you know, there is no up, no down, no left, no right. Like that's the nihilistic tendency. And then the totalitarian is we'll have to make ourselves God to justify such an act. So they're the two things that occur, which are funny because they seem almost contrary to each other, totalitarian and nihilism. But I think the image that I find helpful is that of a wheel. Whereas if you've got like a spoke in the middle of the wheel, and you've got the not the spoke and the
hub in the middle.
The spokes coming out. The further you go out, kind of in towards chaos, the stronger the hub needs to be to keep this wheel turning. So the spokes are really the nihilistic kind of atomization of the world, and totalitarianism goes hand in hand. And the perfect example is the internet itself.
Yeah, of course.
You know, you can do anything. Except, you know, until you do the wrong thing. And so, but I think, and therefore you get this split, which you were hinting at before with AI, that, you know, we've got access to the world and now yet feel so alone because I can't do anything about it. I'm helpless. And so those two things occur though, I think, when you lose the intermediary structures of family, community, church, which they have broken down, I think. And I think they need to be revived. Leo's saying through the Eucharist, which makes the church and builds community and family. But I think there needs to be a rediscovery of those intermediary structures which shape our own identity and existence.
Yeah, and I think he also does mention this earlier in the document where he's talking about, I think it's where he's talking about the sort of transnational corporations and the state being less of a player here, and that there used to be, in, you know, when Leo XIII wrote his document, much more kind of, I think they're called third places in sociological parlance. So it's like, well, you have your workplace and your home. But if you only have those two things, your life is actually quite impoverished. You need a third place, right? And for some people, it's, you know, their footy club, their netball club, the pub, you know, wherever it is. Like you need a third place of community, a union hall or something like that, right? Like you need it. And for me, and for you, it's church. Well, for you, it's actually 1, 2, and 3, I guess. But yeah, you need these places where you can go where it's not, you know, it's nothing that's essential to your life. It's actually a place of leisure and it's a place of flourishing. It kind of makes you more human. And yeah, we're like, if the third place is the internet, we're in a pretty bad spot, right? Because that is a place of atomization, of kind of dislocation. And so the turn has to be back to the things that make us more truly who we are.
And I think one of the things I've been thinking about recently is that of expectation and how much of, I remember a spiritual director saying to me, if you expect anything, you'll be disappointed. And we put false expectations on a heart that it is desirous, that is only God can ultimately fulfill. But I think expectation needs to be layered. I often say it to couples that I do marriage prep for. I say to one spouse to another, do not expect your spouse to fulfill you. You will be disappointed. And a lot of broken marriages come from false expectations that this person will completely fulfill me. It's like, no, you still need your mates. You need
As a husband, I couldn't agree more. I definitely don't
We'll have to ask your wife what she thinks.
I'm not fulfilling her, no way.
Thank God for that. And I think there's something similar, and that's the danger of AI because it seems so powerful. Why can't it fulfill my deepest desires? And yet only the face of another can actually do that.
And only the face of God, ultimately.
Ultimately the face of God, which is our greatest hope. So yeah, I think that's really important.
So I think it's a good document. It's well worth the read. I don't think we've maybe made it sound more complicated than it is.
Yes.
So if you're a bit confused, or
like I said, we like to put our opinions on things.
That's right. Yeah.
Whether they're there or not in the text.
Right. Yeah. And I think like it's always, you can kind of overdo this stuff. You can kind of do documents to death, I think. And certainly it feels already, looking at the sort of online Catholic sphere, like this is being done to death pretty quickly. But it's, it is exciting. It's an exciting document because it's his first one and because it gives us an indication of where he's going to go, but also because he has some very good things to say. It is probably a bit long-winded, I would say, that, it could have used a bit of an editor. But yeah, it's definitely worth a read. It's worth people's time, and it's worth people's time to reflect on, at the very least, how they're interacting, I think, with AI, but also how, where that can go if it's done uncritically, and a life with AI not scrutinized, I think is probably not a life worth.
Well, he does use the phrase examination of conscience as well, which I've found quite good.
Yes.
That self-reflectivity.
Yeah.
On how one, what one's relationship to it is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, fantastic. Anything else that you want to finish with?
No, I think I'm good.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jack.
Thank you, Father.
Dear friend.
Yeah.
And a dear I was going to say host, though.
You're the host.
Yes. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you very much.